Once again, good morning and welcome to our final She Speaks, Hears, and Empowers Influencers program for 2021. I'm Teresa Harvey, President and CEO of the North Orange County Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to thank each of you for joining us. This series has brought together successful and influential women to address issues impacting our society and business today. Now as never before, women are demonstrating ambitions, intelligence, and strength. Last year, our participants indicated they wanted to know more about finance, managing investments, and planning for retirement. So today, you will hear from a specialist in that area. As we begin, I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge and thank our sponsors, including St. Jude Medical Center, California State University Fullerton, Crittenden Services for Children and Families, Farmers and Merchants Bank, Southern California Edison, Roundtree Gardens, American First Credit Union, Park Vista, RAI Wealth, and Needle. I remind you today throughout the program, you put any questions in the Q&A so we make sure they are addressed. The month of April has been deemed Financial Literacy Month, so it certainly seems relevant today to address the important topic of finance. In addition to our speaker, Ms. Geller, joining to me today is James Ripley, President of RAI Wealth and Vice Chair of Finance for the North Orange County Chamber. Jim is a certified financial planner and accredited asset management specialist who began his financial career after graduating from Cal State Fullerton. Throughout his more than 30-year career, he's focused on providing independent and objective financial planning and investment management services to his clients. Welcome, Jim, and thank you for sponsoring our She Influences program and welcoming today's speaker.
Thank you, Teresa, and for all the hard work you and Sarah do behind the scenes for us at the North Orange County Chamber. Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Ripley, and I am the president of RAI Wealth Management and the sponsor of today's event. Our firm works with individuals and businesses from all walks of life, and we encourage everyone to take steps necessary to better their financial situation. And that is the theme of today's presentation with our special guest, Leslie Geller of the Capital Group. Be empowered, how women can guide their financial future. You should have all seen Leslie's impressive resume when you signed up for this event. In addition to her many impressive academic and career accomplishments, I also happen to know that she's a mother of three, and I know a little bit about something in terms of being a past lacrosse champion, so Leslie will have to fill us in on that. Now, Leslie, I've been working with the Capital Group for over 30 years, and I see you just started working for the Capital Group. I know firsthand they're a stellar organization, and they're fortunate to have you, and we all look forward to your presentation today. So thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Jim. Can you guys hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up and let me know. All good? Okay, audio works, so that's the first hurdle. Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for being here and taking your pre-lunch hour to join us. I'm going to do a few things today. First, I'm going to walk through, just give you a brief explanation of what Capital Group is and what I actually do at Capital Group. I'll give you a few minutes on how I got here, because I think some of that will help inform our conversation around women and finances. And then I'm going to get into the substance of our discussion and talk a little bit about my perspective on women and finances and this program we've developed at Capital Group to help women feel more prepared when it comes to their finances at times of transition, right? Especially those unexpected transitions like divorce or the premature death of a spouse. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Capital Group. It's the home of American funds that may be more familiar to you. Capital Group is the world's largest asset manager of actively managed strategies. It's a privately held global company with an 85-year history, and we are based in Los Angeles. I am usually based out of our Los Angeles office downtown. Right now, I am coming to you from my home in Santa Monica. My three daughters, ages 8, 6, and 2.5, are actually home this week because they're on spring break. They just went back to school full time in March, and now we're on spring break. So they are home. So if you hear elephant feet or somebody bursts in, I apologize. I've been saying that at this point in the pandemic, closed doors are only suggestions to them. So I apologize for that ahead of time, but that might give you a little color into my daily life at the moment. So what I do at Capital is I am a wealth strategist. I'll get a little bit more into my background in a second, but I was a lawyer for 14 years before I joined Capital. I've been at Capital for about 2 years. And I basically act as an internal consultant for our sales force and our corporate group as an internal consultant on everything related to tax policy, tax planning. So I work with our lobbyists in DC. I support our sales force with content and my time. I go out and talk to large groups of advisors. And I speak to our investors on all matters related to tax planning and policies. My background is in taxation and tax law. Uh, Before COVID, obviously, I traveled all around the country doing these big presentations. Now I do everything virtually. Right now, I'm spending most of my time talking to groups of advisors and investors all about what's going on in DC as far as tax policy, what we think the big tax changes are going to be for corporations and for wealthy individuals, and then the planning that is coming out of those potential changes. So that is the big focus of my day right now. A little bit more about me. I know Jim alluded to the fact that I played lacrosse in college. I grew up on the East Coast, so as I said, I live in Santa Monica now, but I grew up in Connecticut. I met my husband in law school in Boston. He is from Southern California, so that's how we ended up here. We did our stint in New York at big law firms. I started off at Clearly Gottlieb, which has a big tax practice. That's how I got into tax law. While I was there, I got my LLM in taxation, which is a master's in tax law at NYU. One of the big benefits of working for a big New York firm is that they will pay for you to get your master's in tax law. They actually require it of their tax associates. So I readily took advantage of that. I worked at that big firm in the private clients group, again, doing tax and estate planning for about 5 years. My husband got tired of the cold, got tired of being an M&A lawyer and working all hours of the day and night. And so we moved out here. When we moved out here to Los Angeles, I joined a smaller firm. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Jeffer Mangels, a big California firm. When I moved out here, several of their partners, a group of 6, had just left to start their own offshoot firm called Elkins Kalt. They asked me to join up with them. I did. I really wanted the small firm experience. I was tired of that big firm environment. And we built the firm from the ground up. I was there for about 8 years. So when I started, I was a 5th or 6th year associate. The firm had about 12 lawyers. When I left, there were about 55 lawyers. I was a partner. I was actually the first female partner. I had 2 children and was pregnant with my third. And I had done everything from helping implement the maternity policy, helping bring more women to the firm, helping make sure more women get promoted to partner. So a lot. It was a great, varied experience. Yeah, my legal career starting with the big firm and moving to a smaller firm that eventually became a bigger firm. I said right when I was pregnant with my third, I was approached by a headhunter to join with this opportunity at Capital Group. And it was the opportunity to join the distribution group as a wealth strategist and support the sales force, support our investors, the financial advisors that we work with on everything related to taxation, wealth transfer planning, family governance, right? How to transition wealth down generations in a healthy way. I'd heard a lot about Capital Group. I knew what a fantastic organization it was. It was a really unique opportunity. I was at that point in my legal career ready for a change from the billable hour and working directly on individual client cases, right? Moving away from the drafting of documents. So it was a really different, interesting opportunity. Capital Group, maybe some of you know, has a very intense interview process. And so, I signed up for this interview process. It was about a 6-month period that I did 5 or 6 different rounds of interviews. And I always like to tell the story that the last round I went in and I was about, as I said, like at this point, 3 days away from giving birth with my third daughter. And everyone had been so lovely throughout this process as I got bigger and bigger and bigger. Nobody can say anything, obviously, for HR reasons. And I didn't bring it up as per instructed by the headhunter. So I just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and nobody said anything until finally I waddled into the office, did my last round of interviews. And my current boss called me the day after to offer me the job. And, so it was such poise, asked when I could start, right? If next month was okay. And we all had a good laugh after I told him, in case you hadn't noticed, I'm pregnant, very pregnant, and I need to take some maternity leave. And they were lovely. And we pushed my start date 6 months, and the rest is history. And so I've been at Capital for a little over 2 years now. It will be 2.5 years this summer. And one of those years, obviously, has been this very strange year that we've all had to live through. And we all had to do a big pivot last March and kind of take everything we'd learned and everything we were doing in our current position with our current career and make a big switch. And so, as I said before, I was traveling all around, doing these meetings in person. We had to do a big pivot and switch everything to virtual, as everyone did. And when your normal job is talking to large groups of people, right, that takes some transitioning. But what we've really learned is how fantastic that's been for our scale and our leverage, particularly with what we do, right? I have a very specialized area of expertise. There aren't many people here in Southern California who have my background and my expertise. And so there's only 2 of us who are wealth strategists at Capital, right? We can't be everywhere all at one time, but when we're sitting in our office in front of a computer, we can be a lot more places than if we're traveling around the country on airplanes. So it's really been a fantastic opportunity for us, not just internally, right? Capital Group's a big company, but to get exposed to a larger percentage of the associates at Capital, more of the sales force, work with more people at our company, but really also take advantage of the time we can spend with people all over the country without having to physically be there. And I think just the general acceptance of this virtual space is really going to change how work moves and the expectations around office time. We were talking about this, Teresa and Jim and I, before this started, even after everything goes back to quote unquote normal. And so I think for those of us who have young families and are also trying to balance a career, this hasn't been all bad, right? I mean, you asked me that yesterday when my children were driving me crazy and no one was in school, right? It's been a very long year, but I do think there's a lot of opportunity for companies like Capital Group to take advantage of this general level of acceptance when it comes to the virtual space. So I think we're going to see a lot of good changes that benefit working families, working women going forward. And so, again, trying to find the bright side of things. So one thing I noticed during my time as a lawyer, and this is getting more into the meat of our topic, is how often I encountered women who were in a tough place after a divorce or the premature death of a spouse, right? One of those life transitions that really forces you to reckon with your financial life. So, and the funny thing is I, in my practice as a tax and estate planning lawyer, really worked with high net worth and ultra high net worth clients, some very, very wealthy families. And I was continually surprised at how, even when there was enough money, plenty of money, this was still an issue for women. And it was sometimes an issue for men too, but because of gender norms or traditional societal roles, I most often saw it play out this way for women, right? I saw they weren't prepared to manage their own finances. And what's so funny, and the irony is women are most often the ones who are the last ones standing, right? So if you take divorce out of the equation and you just look at the natural trajectory of life from a statistical sense, women outlive men the vast majority of the time. So chances are women are going to be solely responsible for their finances at some point in their lifetimes. And we've all seen the statistics around that, right? But so often I saw these women at these times of transition, right, who didn't have their own relationships with their financial advisors, with CPAs, with tax professionals, didn't know their rights when it came to property ownership or what they would be entitled to on a divorce, didn't know what their estate planning documents said, or who actually was entitled to a share of their husband's business that she helped build from scratch, right? All of these big pitfalls that resulted in a big panic upon the life transition, right? And potentially a not great resolution for the woman. And as I became a more seasoned attorney, had my own family, started building my own law practice, I really tried to build on this problem and develop a specific focus around supporting women, not just during these life transitions. And this is key. So, not just during a divorce or right after the death of a spouse. That's so often when people come in to the equation, but really supporting them before those transitions happen, right? And it's all about that support in anticipation of those quote unquote unexpected life transitions. That's where the leverage is. And that's what I tried to build my law practice on. So I ended up with a lot of clients, professional women, women who had just inherited a lot of money from parents, grandparents, women who were getting married and doing prenups. Just by virtue of my demographic, I ended up with a big client base focused in this area. And so I was really able to exercise that type of support I was looking to provide, right? That support before those life transitions happened. And when I transitioned to my new position at Capital Group, right, it was a big change in career. I switched industries, went from the legal industry to the financial industry. I knew I wanted to carry over this focus, right? This focus on supporting women, not just during the transitions, but before transitions, because that's where I saw the real value in helping them avoid those common pitfalls we all see happen during divorce after the death of a spouse, right? And I was excited because it was kind of this new platform, right? It was this new perspective, right, of looking at the problem, and it's a larger megaphone, right? Instead of working with clients on an individual basis, I'm talking to large groups of people. So the opportunity to really convey this message around pre-transition support was a big one. And I was really excited about it because of not just the different perspective, but because of the scale. So when I joined Capital, I got to see things from the financial advisor side, right? From the wealth management side, how these things play out for women, right? From the financial side, not as a lawyer, right? And lawyers are sometimes limited or quite often limited in their perspective of some of these issues because their relationship with clients is transactional, right? A client comes to them, says, I need a will or a living trust. I want to make this gift, right? I want to use this wealth transfer strategy technique, right? It's a transactional relationship. With financial advisors, right, and with wealth management, it's more of an ongoing relationship. So you get more of a perspective, more of an insight into the client's financial life and their, general family dynamics as a whole. So after the first few months at Capital, getting my feet under me, I knew I wanted to develop a program around helping women become more prepared for the life transitions that, as I said before, really cause them to reckon with their finances, right? I wanted to develop a program that helped them take control of their financial lives before those transitions happen. And I, like you, I'm sure, have seen so much of this content around women and finances, and some of it treats women as, these alien things, and having special conversations and treating them differently because they're different types of humans. And sure, to some degree, that's true. But I wanted to avoid creating a program around sweeping generalizations and stereotypes and gender norms, right? I wanted to take a different approach and really make it focused on information and tools, because this is where I so often saw the gap between the spouses, right? This gap of understanding. In a traditional couple, right? The man had the relationships, had the information, had the tools. The woman did not, at least to the extent the man did. And so that's where I saw the opportunity in helping women become equipped with the information and the tools to be on equal footing with her spouse. So I took that into the development of our program, and we centered our approach around helping women ask the right questions to get the information, the tools, the documents they need to prepare themselves for those life transitions. We basically went through, I thought back to all my experiences with clients during my time as a lawyer, and picked out all of those specific pitfalls, right? All of those specific trip ups that I saw happen to women, from having a stepchild act as trustee of the marital trust, right? To not keeping their own inherited assets separate from their community assets, to not having enough liquidity available on death to pay taxes and expenses or the upkeep of the primary residence, right? All of those things that became big problems upon life transitions, right? And we then formulated this program that gave women the questions and the tools to get in front of all of these potential issues, right? So we point out the problems, then give them the questions and the tools that they can use to avoid these problems. And this is because, as I said, the big gap was information. But what so often tripped up women or caused this lack of preparedness was just not knowing where to start, right? Recognizing that they didn't have the equivalent amount of information as their spouse, but not even knowing what questions to ask to get started with the conversation, right? And that's a scary place to be, right? And so often when we explore, we've done a lot of conversations around this over the last couple of years. So often when we explore why women are often the ones so underprepared for those life transitions, right? That's what we come to, right? It's that they start off in a place of deficiency and then they just never catch up. Because it becomes harder and harder to catch up the further away you get from parity, right? And that's why so often we see women in this disadvantaged position, at least one of the reasons. I think another big reason, and I was talking about this with some of our marketing folks the other day, is that women generally are just more concerned with the immediate, right? What's in front of them, the caregiving role, whether it's for elderly relatives, whether it's for young children, right? At that time when you're starting to build those relationships with advisors, with professionals, women are focused on what's in front of them, on getting through the day, whether that's getting the kids to school, making sure childcare is all set up, making sure everybody's fed, right? Or caring for elderly relatives, right? That's when our parents get older. At the time when you're starting and building those relationships, women can't be there because they have so much else to do. And there are various other reasons I think that women are so often at a disadvantage, but those are a couple of the reasons. And maybe at the end of this discussion, we can talk about more. Not making generalizations here, but really just speaking from my own personal experience and what I've heard from so many women that I've spoken to over the last couple of years. So we don't have time, obviously, to go through our full program, but what I'm going to do for the last few minutes we have together is give you the highlights, right? I'm going to give you the three most important takeaways, right? The best ways that we see to avoid all of these potential pitfalls that we so often see get all types of women, varying levels of sophistication and wealth, in trouble when it comes to finances, particularly around those life transitions. So, really, those three tools that they can use to help them feel more prepared, take control of their own finances. First, establish your own relationship with the professionals that you work with. And if I had to pick one of the three, this is the most important one. I'm going to give you a couple of stories as cautionary tales here. So, just generally, though, as I said before, it's often the man who has the relationship with the financial advisor, with the attorney, with the professional for various reasons, as we just discussed. But because of that, women are put at a disadvantage from the outset. And so, if you are going to do anything to take control of your finances, it's establishing your own relationship either with your and your spouse's financial advisor, CPA, estate planning attorney, or your own to make sure that when those life transitions happen, you have a person you can trust. So, I'll give you a little story here. In my last year of practice, I represented or did some consulting on a litigation involving this woman. She was our client, a very successful surgeon here in Southern California. She was married to a man who came from a lot of money, like hundreds of millions of dollars of family wealth, like generational family wealth from way back when. And she, the surgeon, made a lot of money, right? As a surgeon here in Los Angeles, as you would expect, she made a lot of money. They had 3 young kids. He did not work. He had lots of money at his disposal, but it was all held in family trusts, right? Now, they lived off her salary because the money was sitting in their family trust. They didn't need it. She made plenty of money. So they paid their mortgage with her salary. They paid for cars with her salary. They paid their kids' college tuition or all their tuition, the private school tuition, college tuition with her salary. They didn't dip into his trusts, right? She used his attorneys. She didn't get her own, except for the prenup, which was signed early on before the marriage. Obviously, she didn't have her own people. She didn't establish her own relationships. So, what happened was he ended up filing for divorce, right? They had kids, a couple in private school, one was in college. So, it was a long term marriage. He ended up filing for divorce, and he actually filed for alimony. Believe it or not, he filed for alimony because they had been living off of her salary. They had not touched his trusts except through various loans. So they had never taken a distribution from his trust to pay for their expensive vacation home or for their car or his gifts to various people, right? Everything had been done through, per the advice of their lawyers, through loans. She didn't have her own legal counsel to advise her that by doing that, she was exposing herself to this potential alimony claim upon a divorce. And he actually was awarded alimony because all of those trust funds were not treated as his because they technically weren't, right? So even though the lawyers were doing everything they were supposed to do, right? They didn't advise her that she was opening herself up to this potential liability by paying for all of their family expenses with her salary. This is where it would have benefited her to have her own counsel, right? Her own estate planning attorney, her own tax professional, her own financial advisor, and not just rely on those that had been serving her husband and her husband's family for decades, right? That is a big that is an extreme cautionary tale, but that's how it can play out if you don't have those relationships that you trust, right? Even involves you can start off with those prenup conversations, right? If you're talking about somebody who has a lot of money, even we're seeing more and more. I was reading an article about this the other day, that even couples who are not starting off with very much are entering into these prenup conversation. And that's a great place to start looking for those individual professionals to guide you, right? Whether that's the attorney, the financial advisor, the tax professional. And it doesn't mean that you can't have the same one as your spouse, but you should have your own relationship with them as well. You don't have to have separate advice, but you do have to have your own relationship with them. That is the really important key there. The second thing, have the hard conversations now, right? Whether that is getting a prenup, whether that is having a postnuptial agreement, right? We're seeing more and more of these. They're effectively prenups, but signed after the marriage, right? Whether that's 3 years into the marriage or 20 years into the marriage. It's kind of like resetting who owns what and who gets what in the case of a divorce or death, right? Postnups are really effective, especially when the situation, as far as family dynamics or finances, has shifted significantly since the beginning of the marriage. So the second one is have the hard conversations now about who owns what, clarifying ownership, clarifying rights. And this can be conversations with your spouse, conversations with your advisor and the professionals that you work with. But one key here is those conversations, a lot of people put them off, right? But they don't get easier during stressful times. They don't get easier upon a divorce. They don't get easier upon a death. So if you are going to have these hard conversations around finances, particularly as they relate to rights and expectations around finances with your spouse, now is the time to have those conversations, right? And some common places where I saw this play out is in blended families, right? Where you have you have second or third marriage situation, right? And the husband wants to appoint his children from his first marriage as the trustee of the marital trust for his wife upon death, right? If you're that wife, you're not going to want that to happen, but that's going to be a hard conversation to have, right? It's all about pushing those conversations now, asking the right questions that are going to get the information you need to feel prepared, even if those are hard conversations. And so often I would see, I'm sure so many people on the call have seen this, when a lawyer drafts an estate planning document, a set of estate planning documents, they send you a really nice summary of what those estate planning documents say. I would always say over and over to my female clients, and I say it now to female investors, the summary is not enough. Ask more questions, right? Really poke and prod. It's not enough to know that you get 50% of the assets in a marital trust, right? You need to understand what that 50% will be funded with and who is going to be in charge of it, right? Will it be funded with the house? Will it be funded with enough cash to pay for the upkeep of the house, right? Will it be funded with an illiquid business interest that really doesn't help you very much when it comes to paying your daily expenses, right? It's having those hard conversations and asking those hard questions now so you don't have to deal with the fallout of not knowing later. Those conversations never get easier. Ever. I have never seen it happen once. And if you think about it, like, how would that be the case if during a stressful time like divorce or death, those conversations actually get simpler? So don't be satisfied with the summary. That's a great tagline there. Don't be satisfied with the summary. Ask more questions, even if it's uncomfortable, because it's never going to get easier. Third thing, so we went first was establish our own relationship with professionals, have the hard conversations, ask the hard questions now, right? Particularly around your rights upon a divorce, upon death, with regard to property ownership, with regard to estate planning documents. The summary is not sufficient. And then the third big takeaway, the big tool here is be realistic in your expectations, right? And when I say be realistic, a lot of people interpret that as, well, I don't want to be cynical about my expectations around my family or my husband. And it's not being cynical, but it's being realistic in your expectations around what could happen upon a divorce or death, right? People are people, even if they don't have nefarious objectives. They're dealing with a lot, right? Especially right now. A lot of different dynamics, a lot of different things pulling at them, right? Don't assume the worst, but be practical in what you're anticipating. And so often I saw women rely on the fact that, oh, he'll take care of me, right? Or, oh, my stepchildren will be fine with it, right? We have a really good relationship. That's great, but you can't rely on that, right? You have to take care of yourself and your interests. So that's a big one I mentioned before. Don't assume that your stepchildren are going to do the right thing, right? If your spouse dies early, even if you have a fantastic relationship with them, right? Hear that saying, blood is thicker than water. Things get complicated when you have blended family situations, right? Don't assume that you're going to get distributions from a trust that your spouse leaves you, right? Don't assume that if you get divorced, your ex-husband isn't going to file for alimony because he has all these large family trusts at his disposal, right? Do you think that surgeon I was talking about, do you think she anticipated her husband ever really filing for alimony, right? If she had had somebody guiding her, that might have been anticipated, which is why that first principle is so important of having your own professionals. But be realistic in your expectations. And I think there's a great story here, not a cautionary tale. This is a good one. So I was representing this family, and the husband, uh, they got married 20 years ago. The husband started a business that really did well during the mortgage crisis in the early aughts. And they went from being worth a couple $1,000,000 to being worth $100 million basically overnight. Before they had that big accession to wealth, the wife came to us. We were representing both spouses. The wife came to us and said, I'm concerned that we do not have clarity around who owns my husband's company that he built, right? I've been with him from the start, but I don't know if the corporate documents are in his name. They were in California, so it was community property. She said, obviously, we live off his salary and the distributions from the company. But beyond that, I don't know much. And when the company's worth $2 or $3 million, that's not high stakes. But if 6 months from now, when we're going to have this big capital event, the company is worth $100 million, that's going to be a really big concern. And she said, our marriage is fine right now. I'm not worried about getting divorced, but I want to have that hard conversation now, right? I don't want to be aspirational in my expectations, right? She was being realistic and taking care of herself. And we ended up talking to the husband, bringing him into the conversation. Everybody got their own counsel. We did a full review of everything. And especially with respect to the company, we established with a postnuptial agreement who owned what and who would own what upon a divorce or the death of one of them. So we basically did a full reset as far as expectations, all because the wife came to us with realistic expectations. And then the moral of this story takes a little turn, but they ended up getting divorced a few years later. I have a feeling people will laugh when I say this. It was the easiest divorce I have ever been a party to, because it was all done beforehand, right? She took that tool of being realistic with in her expectation, even though everything was great at the time, and she had that hard conversation. So again, to recap, those three tools, and this is really a distillation of our whole program of pointing out the pitfalls and then giving women the tools and the questions to ask, is establish your own relationships with professionals. And that includes everybody from tax preparer, CPA, uh, financial advisor, estate planning attorney, if you're doing other complicated transactions, real estate attorney, corporate attorney. And as I said before, it doesn't mean having your own person, but having your own relationship with the person, even if they are guiding your spouse as well. Second, have those hard conversations now. It's unpleasant, but it's certainly not going to get any easier. And this is around everything from who's the beneficiary of retirement accounts to who the trustee of the trusts are under the living trust, right? To if there's enough liquidity upon death, right? Those are the hard conversations. Don't be satisfied with the summary. And the same goes for finances too. I'm focusing on the planning here, but don't be satisfied with the balance sheet, right? Ask more questions. Go a layer deeper to make sure you really understand what your rights would be upon a divorce or death and what your ownership rights are now. And then third, be realistic in your expectations. Don't be aspirational. Don't be cynical, but really be practical in what you expect from people during those times of stress, and then use that practicality to ask those hard questions. All right, I think we have some time for Q&A. I'm going to turn it back to Jim and Teresa.
Great. Thank you so much, Leslie. It's great advice. And I'm going to kind of just come in with a basic question for those who may be going, this is wonderful information. Where do I start? And is there some guideposts or literature if someone is just starting out and they're going, I don't even know where to begin? You know, I'll call Jim, but I really want to understand more how the stock market works. Where would you recommend somebody start?
Yeah, I think the ideal place to start, Teresa, is exactly as you said, is reach out to somebody like Jim that you know and trust. They're going to be the person that's going to give you, especially for those of us with young families who are busy, talking to somebody who knows what they're talking about is going to be the easiest shortcut to getting all that information you need. Now, that being said, I know I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of listening, but there are great podcasts right now that deal with everything finance related. There are women focused podcasts around finance. There are investing podcasts. Everything is available through podcasting apps. And I've found that such an easy, again, shortcut way to get more information and learn new things. As I said, I transitioned industries, so the financial world has been new to me. And how I got up to speed was by having my ear pods in all the time when I'm walking the dog, when I'm in the car, just listening and trying to absorb all that information. But podcasts are huge, but really the easiest way is to reach out to somebody you trust, a financial advisor like Jim, who can help guide you to the right resources.
That's wonderful. Jim, do you have some questions for Leslie?
Yeah, just a comment on a positive side. Doing this for 30 years now, I'm finding that the younger clients coming in, the couples today, it is more shared. Where in the past, it was usually one spouse or the other that took full charge of the finances. And my partners and I were always concerned when it was the husband, because we know what happens. They die first, and as you mentioned. But kind of a general question for you is, you have 3 young daughters, and I have a daughter who's college age. And how do you start that conversation, get them interested in taking responsibility for their own finances when they have no interest in it?
That's a really great question. And I think so much, especially when they're little and we're seeing this, is just talking about it in an age appropriate way, right? Just having that conversation with them in a room in an age appropriate way. We're in the process of buying a house, and we've been explaining to my 8-year-old like the concept of a mortgage, right? And how that works. And also with all the talking I'm doing around tax policy and taxes while they're all home, we've been talking a lot about what tax policy is and what taxes are. And I think just having some of those conversations in an age appropriate way is just key from an awareness perspective. And then as they get older, it's so much, and Jim, I'm sure you see this all the time, it's finding what they're interested in, right? And then tying it to what you want them to learn about. If they're really interested in charitable giving, right? Whether it's animals or sea creatures, right? Can you tie in financial literacy to some type of charitable giving program? A lot of wealthy families that we work with do that. That's how they get the kids integrated into the family wealth conversation, is by giving them agency to make a certain amount of charitable distribution every year, right? They're given the opportunity to present on the institution that they want to give to, right? They're learning how to look at the finances of that institution. But at the same time, on the other side of the token, I say, if the kids are not interested in charitable giving, that's not going to work, right? Maybe the child, and everybody talks about charitable giving as this perfect avenue to get kids integrated into the financial conversation. But for a kid that's not interested, it's going to do the opposite. And so then you look for the other hook. Some kids are really interested in investing, right? I have a few friends whose children are like 13 and 14 years old and are fascinated by some of these startups, and the parents are giving them a certain amount of money to maybe invest in some of these startup companies, right? Very small amounts, but maybe that's the hook, getting them integrated in that way. So I think it's figuring out what they're interested in and then tying it into what you want them to learn. But when they're little, I think it's so much about just having the conversations, right? Exposing them in an age appropriate manner to the topics that are the focal point of the financial discussions they'll have later on.
Very good. Another
Excellent
positive
advice.
aspect of being locked in the same house.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, Teresa, I don't know if you've been monitoring, if there's any other questions.
I don't see any other questions at this time, but I just think that it's so important as a woman to be aware of the different ways to plan for your future, to begin as early as possible, and to make sure that you're prepared for whatever situation. And also as a woman, be part of the planning and contributions, the discussion, to make sure that when you are ready to retire, or not work quite as hard, that you have the financial resources to do so. Because anybody that is going to plan to rely upon Social Security entirely will find very soon that that's not going to go very far. There is a question here. It says, I have a lot of middle-aged female friends who haven't even started doing any planning. How can we have more opportunities for women to share this information?
That's a great question, and that's actually one of the things that I do on a daily basis. I mean, I do probably one event a week with investors, some of our investors, around this topic, right? And I also do the same type of event with financial advisors, where I talk to them about how to get women to move when it comes to financial and estate planning. So I do it both for the investors and the advisors. I know a lot of firms like Capital Group offer similar type of programs because there's a huge amount of opportunity there, right? Not only to do some good, but to build some business, right? I mean, the statistics are absolutely mind-boggling when you look at the potential transfer of wealth to women over the next several decades, right? Because women, as I said before, statistics show, will be the last ones standing just because of the demographics, right? Women tend to outlive men. And so I think those types of programs are fantastic. I think that having conversations, I always used fear as an excellent motivator. Not taking it to a place of paranoia or panic, but I do think telling those cautionary tales really gets people to act. And also, not just the cautionary tale, but helping figure out, like with kids, helping figure out what motivates the individual person. It's going to be different for everybody, right? Is it fear of all of their estate going to the federal government because they didn't do the proper tax planning? Is it fear around not providing for their children or grandchildren? Is it a love of charitable giving, right, for a particular institution? Everybody has a different hook, right? Everyone also on the other side of the coin also has a different hang up, why they haven't done something. For a lot of women, it's that they don't have the financial literacy, and it's become harder and harder to get to that place of financial literacy as they fall further and further behind. And I think normalizing the conversation and just talking, same with kids, right? Just having the conversations is probably the best place to start, which is what we try to do every day.
That's wonderful. Jim, any last minute words of advice or suggestions or comments from you?
Well, we hit on some great points today, and for anybody who's been procrastinating, you really need to self-examine and say, hey, either find an advisor like myself or do the research on your own, because time's ticking away, and the sooner you get started, the more beneficial it will be. So, Leslie, I can't thank you enough. It was a great presentation.
Thanks
And
so much for having me.
Great. Thank you again for our audience, for Leslie for joining us. This recording will be available on our She Influences website, www.she-influences.com. So please check there for past recordings as well as this one. I also want to remind you that the Chamber continues to present informational and educational programs. So check our website and our newsletters for programs of interest to you. And please plan to join us for Fullerton's State of the City featuring Mayor Bruce Whitaker on April 29th at 11 a.m. Registration is available now from our website. So thank you again to everybody. This has been a great SHE program. We really recognize all the speakers and the sponsors of this, and thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon, and remember, planning begins now, and it begins with you. Thank you.